France burns as Macron legislates on behalf of the elites and gets verified by the highest courts in the land. The protesters target Blackrock. Is this global protest a response to the fact that we're never going to build back better? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to truth and freedom. It appears that there is a global movement, a global uprising, whether it's protesters in France, whether it's agricultural protests all over the world, whether it's health workers in this country. People are beginning to oppose democratic power. People are beginning to recognize that there is no way through democratic means of having your voice heard. But we will continue to report the facts. Turn on the notification bell right now and subscribe to our channel. We make this content every single day and we want you to watch all of it. Today's story focuses on the ongoing protests in France. The highest constitutional courts in the land have just verified Macron's decision to raise the pension age. But really what French people are protesting is the fact that democracy is meaningless now and that their government clearly operates on behalf of corporate and financial elites. This is a global problem, and the fact that they're protesting outside Blackrock is not an indication that they think Blackrock are directly involved, although Blackrock are involved in a hell of a lot of things. It's just that people have started to intuitively understand that democracy is not the answer. If you can have administrative and legislative action take place that's clearly against the will of the people, then it's necessary to protest. It's necessary to mobilize. And you'll notice that simultaneously, police are becoming more militarized, protest laws are being introduced, almost as if the elites are preparing now for the next phase. Let's have a look at the story as the mainstream media would have you understand it.
Anger that's been growing in France boils over into red-hot rage. Thousands gathered for one final protest before the country's constitutional court cleared the path for the president to bring in his pension reform.
It's interesting that they're protesting around those Olympic rings. That's the illusion of France. That's the corporate globalist image. We're holding the Olympics. Everything's fine. But the people of France are enraged and furious. They're a country more given to protest than a country like mine, the UK. But even here, nurses and junior doctors and healthcare workers are protesting for the same reason everyone's protesting, really. Global elites are increasingly finding ways of bypassing democracy. During the pandemic, there was a huge wealth transfer, and people feel a general sense of unease and obviously are painfully aware of economic inequality, of a deterioration in the conditions of their life, and the inability to do anything about it through democracy. We know that in most countries, all significant parties are generally owned by the same financial and corporate interests. That's why people are taking to the streets. And even with all these protests, the highest constitutional court in France verified Macron's decision, increasing the age before which you can receive a pension. Isn't it interesting how bewildered we've become? We regard the state like a parent that we have to appeal to and continually appease. We forget that they just work for us, actually. All of their money, all of the money that's ending up with the military-industrial complex, all of the money that's being spent in various ways that most of us don't approve of, comes from us. 40% of your time, 30% of your time, 50% of the time, depending on your country and your tax bracket, is being spent working for them. You should have some say in how they behave. And the fact you have to burn down your own cities in order to be heard shows you the point we're at historically. And the general apathy that many of us feel is not the apathy of, oh no, I just want to watch the new Mario Brothers movie. It's the apathy of, this doesn't do anything, does it? It doesn't matter if you vote for Blair or Clinton or Obama or whoever, you're going to get the same result. The system has been stitched up. That's why whether it's in Sri Lanka or the Netherlands or the UK or France or across America, you are seeing the rise of protest movements. And instead of parties emerging now that are addressing the concerns of these suddenly emergent mobs, what you're getting is the militarization of the police force, more surveillance laws, more distraction, more crap. We actually have to awaken now.
The democracy is dead today.
We're just more angry to not be listened, and we will not go home now.
They say they intend to keep fighting, but constitutionally, this is the end of the road.
The problem with mass uprisings is it's harder for the mainstream media to do the job of the government and smear them. If it's just one person, they say, oh, this person's a crackpot, look at their history. But when it's a mob in the street, it becomes difficult, not impossible, you remember the Canadian truckers, to smear them and say, oh, what these people are motivated by is they hate our freedoms, they're misogynist, they're racist. The fact is that ordinary people, generally speaking, have more in common with one another than they have with the elites that govern them. And generally speaking, we understand and know that. Division has to be stoked. Stories of division, of fracture and fragmentation have to be continually told. The culture has to pump you full of divisiveness so that we can't awaken from the fog and say, hang on a minute, we could organise things better than this, couldn't we?
President Macron is yet to address the public in the wake of the court ruling and showed no signs of concern on a visit to Notre Dame Cathedral while protesters marched through the streets.
As usual, the ridiculous illusion of the politician in the hard hat. Oh, Notre Dame is coming on really well. What's that sound? People fighting? It must be that bloody hunchback. It can't be people protesting in the streets because you're nicking their pensions. Hold on, what is the hunchback saying? Could I have my pension back, please? Esmeralda! Shut up, you fucking hunchback!
Protesters in France storming the offices of Blackrock overnight as violence continues to plague Paris. It was part of large-scale protests over President Emmanuel Macron's push to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64.
I suppose one of the things that's promising is that it's not a left-wing or right-wing protest. It's a popular uprising. This is what we're going to need more of in order to change the systems that we currently live within. We can't say, well, I only like these kind of right-wing protests or I only like these left-wing protests. We're going to have to put aside those kind of divisions and focus on what's important. That seems to be happening somewhat organically in France. Perhaps if these protests are successful, we will see attempts to dismiss them or define them as right-wing or fascist in order to undermine the legitimacy of the protest. That's what happens continually. Is what they're protesting for legitimate? Is it reasonable? Is it fair that they're having to work for longer? Because the argument cannot be addressed, because the argument is correct, eventually they will have to attack the protesters. We would not be able to make this fantastic content without our sponsors. That's why I've got to ask you right now, and I need an honest answer. Do you suffer from brain fog, distraction, fatigue? Do you? Is there a secret elixir that can give you energy, vim, chutzpah, moxie? Get up and go get 'em. Yes, there bloody well is. Heights. With just 2 capsules a day, you can enjoy clarity, focus, sleep, calm. Each capsule is packed with all the vegan omega-3s and vitamins B, C and D that we need to support our frankly fragile mental health. Heights couldn't be further away from the evils of Big Pharma. They're all about transparency. Look, you can even see through the capsule. That's transparency. All the ingredients are in the most bioavailable forms so your body can absorb and use them. No synthetic crap, just pure, unadulterated goodness. Get a head start and use brand 15 for 15% off your first box of Heights Smart Supplement. That's brand 15 for 15% off your first box of Heights Smart Supplement. Trust me, your brain and your body will thank you. Now, let's go back to other version of me talking about the government, big tech, the military-industrial complex, and things that are a lot more opaque than this.
Blackrock is the world's largest asset manager. They work with private pension funds.
So even if it's not a direct protest against Blackrock, it is an understanding of the tangential relationships between Blackrock and pensions more generally. Let's have a look at the story. Demonstrators forced their way into the building that houses Blackrock's office in Paris last week. The meaning of this action is quite simple. We went to the headquarters of Blackrock to tell them the money of workers for our pensions, they are taking it. Jerome Schmidt, spokesman for the French union SUD, told CNN affiliate BFM TV. Blackrock declined to comment. Since his election, Macron has been intent on ignoring or crushing any form of opposition. Always a good sign of democracy. In his first term, the National Assembly was reduced to a rubber stamping chamber where the president's majority voted in lockstep for any government project. Issues as important as the war in Ukraine, arms deliveries to Kiev, and sanctions against Russia were not subject to serious debate or put to a vote. The unemployment benefit reform was given an accelerated path passage and controversial measures have been introduced stealthily by decree. As soon as disagreement arises, Macron resorts to force, ignoring checks on power to power, not even deigning to meet the unions campaigning against the pension reform despite their repeated requests. Democracy now is an illusion. It's a man in a white hat outside a cathedral while Paris burns. This arrogance can only fuel disillusionment with democracy and strengthen the feeling that the political game is inaccessible to most. This is true in your country, America, in Canada, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in India, in Sri Lanka. Our governments have been co-opted by centralised financial and corporate interests to varying degrees. What we are given are palliatives and distractions rather than democracy. You can argue about things that do not affect their economic interests. You can watch things that do not affect their economic interests. You can get involved in cultural debates. What you cannot do is impede their attempt to fulfill their agenda. It also illustrates the arrogance of elites when confronted with popular anger and their propensity to deceive, lie, and to conceal to achieve their ends, while at the same time revealing institutional decay. So if Blackrock are not directly involved in this, maybe they are, difficult to tell, they're quite an opaque organisation. What have Blackrock been up to lately? Blackrock ended 2022 with $10.2 trillion in assets. That's the first time any money manager has surpassed that milestone. Blackrock, Vanguard and State Street hold about 1/5 of the shares in the top 500 companies on the US stock exchange. Blackrock's aggressive initiatives, a mix of lobbying, campaign contribution and networking, were key to this success. Blackrock has also forged deep connections to Washington's political class, following in the footsteps of banks like Goldman Sachs. So how do you think democracy works really? Do you think your little vote makes a difference, or do you think the lobbying, campaign donations and networking are more significant in forming the shape of the systems that most of us live within? In April 2021, during the pandemic, the Wall Street Journal reported BlackRock's profits rose 49%. So a time that might have meant closure of small business, a time that might have meant your children stopped going to school, a time that might have meant that you saw loved ones die. No matter where you stand on the spectrum, and believe me, I don't feel that that's the most important issue anymore, BlackRock did great. 49% increase in profits. If the most powerful interests in the world benefit from crisis, what incentive is there to stop crisis from happening? So while we were told we were going to be building back better, what actually happened in the last couple of years? According to Oxfam's annual inequality report, the richest 1% of people have captured nearly twice as much new wealth as the rest of the world combined since the pandemic. Their fortunes soared by 26 trillion, increasing their share of new wealth from 50% to 2/3. The breakdown of these figures exposes how on a global basis extreme wealth is accumulated not by innovating or increasing production, but by taking advantage of rising prices and exploiting labour. In this effort, wealthy people are enabled by a lack of regulation and taxation. The result is a bonanza of plunder with no sheriff in town. We're continually told that if you were to regulate markets or try to control this kind of globalist interest, that's stopping entrepreneurs and free market capitalism. We don't have that anymore. This wealth transfer is not a result of geniuses in laboratories coming up with stuff. It's a result of people buying, accumulating, spread betting, stuff that's more akin to informed gambling than true free market ingenuity. This has been happening for a while, but the pandemic accelerated the trend. They benefited from rising costs by using them as an alibi to charge higher than inflation prices, then distributing the rewards as dividends instead of higher wages. Food and energy corporations made a killing, making $306 billion in windfall profits in 2022, then distributing 84% to shareholders. They benefited from stimulus packages that pushed up asset prices. They benefited from low interest rates that helped them to expand their property empires. According to Credit Suisse, lower interest rates and government support programs resulted in a huge transfer of wealth from the public sector to private households, which saw their debts lowered and the value of their assets, shares and properties rise. The obscenity of this system is made possible by the dramatically diminished bargaining power of labour. Weak labour is cheap labour. The purpose is to transform the human worker into a machine that can be switched off when not in use. In 2020, Amazon's UK sales soared by half to 19.4 billion. In 2021, an investigation in Britain found that the company was bypassing its own employment standards by hiring thousands of zero-hours workers through agencies. These workers have no employment protections, their shifts can be cancelled at the last minute, and there is no guarantee of tenure of employment. But it is successful tax avoidance that is the strongest pillar propping up global inequality, and its dismantling would be the quickest solution. There is little chance of that happening soon. Tax regimes, like much of the conventional economic wisdom about the benefits of wealth creation, appreciation to all, are increasingly out of step with not only the needs of poor people, but with what is required for the health of our economies. What's most striking about the post-pandemic profit boom is the truly global nature of the problem. It's not only the hope of a world recalibrated by COVID towards stronger public infrastructure that is turning to dust in our mouths. An older dream is dying too, of a post-Cold War globalization that was supposed to bring us all closer, usher in a utopia of free trade, growth, employment and sustainable development. What this model of globalization ended up achieving was standardizing ways for wealthy people to pay as little as possible, concentrating economic activity on those with purchasing power and hanging the rest out to dry. So what is globalization about really? Is it about creating a fairer world, or is it about creating a utopia where powerful elites can enact their agenda in countries as diverse as Sri Lanka, France, the UK, the US, the Netherlands, all the while creating narratives that suit their agenda wherever appropriate? That this country's suddenly racist, that this country doesn't care about the climate, that these nurses and doctors are greedy. This behemoth stands astride the globe and is able to legislate freely without opposition. And even when opposition does rise up, they know that the police are getting militarized, protest laws are coming, and an obedient media will portray protesters however is convenient to shut down meaningful protests. So France may continue to burn. Will it make any difference? Will it be able to interrupt this globalist agenda? What I believe is we now have to form a true global movement that focuses on whatever agenda is applicable in our nations, overlooks cultural differences in order to come together temporarily in order to achieve shared goals. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments in the chat. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these, turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. But more important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.